Ian Maxwell, since I last interviewed you, the world saw perhaps one of the most high-profile trials in decades unfold, a trial that led to your sister being found guilty. How did Ghislaine react to that verdict, and how did you and your family react?
Well, if you recall, Ghislaine made her position completely clear at the trial itself. She said the government had not proven its case. That's what she said. That's in fact the only thing she did say. And from her perspective, that was the case, and from ours too. I mean, I sat through a number of days of that trial, and that was my own view as well. So she was shocked. We were extremely shocked by the result, and declared straight away that it was going to be appealed, and that's what's happening. So I think, of course, initially she was pretty down, as you would expect, but shortly after that terrible night and the result and so on, we then had this incredible development with this juror who suddenly appeared in the media and demonstrated that his own alleged sexual abuse as a child, he had deployed it during the jury deliberations, and by his own words swayed jurors that were doubtful of what they'd heard. So obviously at that point, Ghislaine felt a lot more clear as to why the verdict came the way it did.
Yeah, no, and let's stay on that. So as we all know, just for people who are watching who don't know, one of the jurors in your sister, so in Ghislaine's trial, later revealed that he'd used his own past experience of being abused to influence his fellow jurors to fully accept the claims made by Ghislaine's accusers. He went to the press and gave quite a detailed account, and he told the jurors not to doubt the accusers. But even worse, it was revealed that he hadn't declared his potential bias when going through the selection process to become a juror, a revelation that would have undoubtedly led to him not being chosen as a juror at all. So I'll quickly quote the Sixth Amendment of the American Constitution. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district. So based on the fact that at least one of the jurors demonstrated they'd broken this rule from the Constitution, an appeal was launched by Ghislaine's defence to call for a mistrial and demanding that a retrial be held with new jurors that wouldn't be as, wouldn't be biased. That's now been rejected since we last spoke. What was Ghislaine's reaction to that? And what are your own thoughts about the decision? What, that the judge decided to ignore that impact and just to say, no, the verdict stands?
Well, I think this has been going on. Ghislaine was arrested in July 20. The judge met her shortly after that, rejected her first bail application. It's coming up 2 years, July 22. Countless defense motions have been denied or rejected or given a short shrift. So I suppose the result that's come here at one level is not unsurprising given the court's prior performance. But I think what is really shocking is the way in which the whole inquiry was set up. The judge had to set it up. The defense requested that there was no need for an inquiry. Prima facie, what had happened was that the man had lied on his form, and therefore the defense did not have the opportunity, had he been truthful, to then ask him questions on that and either have him struck out by virtue of the peremptory challenge that they were entitled to exercise, or by his answers, the court would have struck him out. And it is the denial of the defense's opportunity to question that juror as a direct function of his lie that is the central appeal point. And the what happened then was that the court decided to set very, very narrow parameters as to who was going to question the juror, namely the judge. What were the questions going to be? Although she invited questions to be submitted both by the defense and by the prosecution, ultimately she decided on those questions, and she decided that they would only be to this one juror, and they would only deal with 2 questions that he had answered by his own admission wrongly. And the only reason we know that he answered it wrongly was because his initial reaction on the inquiry being ordered was to take the Fifth Amendment. That is to say, to remain silent for fear of incriminating himself with his own words. That is tantamount to an admission of what had gone on here. So how did the prosecution react to this? They offered him immunity. They talked to him and they offered him immunity. The judge then, once he admitted that he had not answered truthfully, was given immunity by her at the start of this inquiry, on the basis, of course, that if he was perjuring himself, he'd go to jail. But he'd be given immunity, get out of jail. So there was no sanction. He could say what he liked. And indeed, he said exactly what he liked. And it was enough for the court to feel that, notwithstanding he had admitted he lied, that somehow he was not a biased juror, whether actively biased or that bias could be inferred or assumed. And all kinds of reasons that he put up. He was in a hurry, love affair, broken up, all incredible story. The judge decided that this made him, this wasn't enough to suggest that he couldn't have been an impartial juror. She took 40 pages. The court took 40 pages to justify this. Amongst many shocking things in that judgment, I felt was one extraordinary statement, which I can't remember exactly because I don't have it in front of me, but essentially it said that one of the reasons was that this inquiry came down the way it did was to ensure the finality of judgments, but not the paramount interests of justice. So to say we were shocked is understated. Clearly, Ghislaine was also very perturbed by it, and we put out a statement to that effect. If I had to summarize it, the dice were loaded by the court. The verdict, which was unsafe by virtue of this impartial, the lack of partiality of the partiality of the juror, was the follow-up opinion and order of the court is deeply tainted. So this is going to go to appeal, and it's just one of many points of appeal. Pre-trial, in trial, post-trial, and we are confident that Ghislaine will be successful on appeal.
And he did mention that he does. We've just spoken about the Fifth Amendment. He pled the Fifth. He doesn't want to incriminate himself by his own words. But let's be honest, he's already done that. He's gone to the press. It's already printed in the papers where he's specifically given an account.
But he's entitled to go to the press. But what is really shocking? It's as a direct result of what he said to the press, that the judge had no option but to do something. She wasn't going to lose the verdict, so she put this inquiry. And then, for the reasons that I've explained, I consider that it was really a foregone conclusion.
And listen, what we normally see in high-profile cases like this, we've seen it in many in the United States, is they control the jurors so that they aren't manipulated by the media. They remain impartial. So what they tend to do is they house jurors in a hotel under the control of court officers and limiting their access to outside influence. So including the biased coverage of the trial on TV and in newspapers. They even remove TVs out of rooms. We see this in many trials, in America. Yet in Ghislaine's trial, the jurors were allowed to go home each night and even have a long weekend off, at their request, unsupervised, with their families, with their friends who have seen all of the coverage of the trial over Christmas. Do you think that was fair? And do you think that had any impact on this trial?
I think I would give you two answers to that. Firstly, it's a tremendous burden on individual jurors. The courts are really mindful. That's a huge personal burden. It's like lockdown. That's the way to think about it. Except you haven't got the telly. So it's they think twice before putting a jury into sequestration. It's 9 times out of 10. It's to do with the fact that the jury there are people in their community that could put pressure on them, especially in sort of mafia type trials and that kind of thing. So judges tend not to do it if they can avoid it. It so happened that I was on trial myself 30 years ago, and my jury was sequestered, and thank goodness. Because public opinion was really not in our favor at that time, but at least that's what happened. So I think that's the first answer part of your question on sequestration itself. As far as do I think that may have had an impact on the trial, it's possible. Of course it's possible. Courts rely on jurors' integrity, honesty. If they say don't consult papers and don't look at television and don't talk to your family and don't talk to your friends, I am sure that most jurors abide by that. That's the oath that they've taken. And I think they do a pretty good job, actually. I do think that we know this juror was in communication with an independent journalist who then broke the story of the interview with him in the Independent. We don't know when that interview took place or how. I mean, the implication is obviously that it took place straight after the trial, but we don't know. There might have been other times that we don't know about. We just don't know enough. So I can't say one way or another, but it's possible, of course. And it would have been very damaging.
I suppose as well, it's hard to get a completely impartial juror on a case like this. Someone who doesn't know much about the case, doesn't have an opinion either way. Very hard, because it was splashed in every headline, every news. She was essentially packaged as guilty before she ever stepped foot inside the courtroom. Whatever. I know you've gone. We've been talking about the appeals, etc., and we're focusing on the trial still. What other aspects of Ghislaine's trial do you think were unfair and denied her impartiality and due process?
Where to begin?
I was going to say,
I think the most important,
3 hours,
the most compelling reality was that my sister has been banged up now. It'll be 2 years in July. She was in horrendous and continues to be in horrendous incarceration. She's in isolation. She's on suicide watch. She continues to have torches shone in her eyes every 15 minutes to make sure she's breathing. She's denied all kinds of rights and opportunities, whether that's in commissary or books or whatever you like, fresh air. It's a shocker. So the most important thing, I think, is that she was already frail, mentally and physically at the start of her trial. And I think this impacted for sure on whether or not she would give evidence in her own defense, knowing what an aggressive and long affair that would have been. So I don't know that is the primary reason, but I think it's a fair assumption. So the physical conditions, her physical state, her mental state, all of this clearly, and of course we complained about it to the UN, and that jury is still out there for the UN Committee on can't remember the name of the unit now, but
Yeah.
these kind of conditions in a first world country are not acceptable.
No.
They're not acceptable in our country. They should not be acceptable in America, but they appear to be.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Second, it's quite obvious, and you mentioned it already, the tremendous pre-trial, in-trial, and of course post-trial bias of the jury, of the media.
Yeah.
The media's take on this from the get-go, which was encouraged on purpose by the prosecution when they held an infamous press conference the day of Ghislaine's arrest, and the prosecutor pointed to a picture of Epstein and my sister, and basically the implication was they're guilty. Yeah. And then proceeded to come out with a whole array of things. This became then open season on Ghislaine, and it's never let off. No. And of course, it's not just the media themselves that have followed it up, but the numerous accusers who were not called in this trial have been very, very vociferous. Their lawyers have been vociferous. None of this has been put to test. And, it's just drip, 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 drip. And this, that's at a micro level. At the macro level, you've got then the Me Too movement, which has drawn enormous, a huge impact in numerous trials before Ghislaine's, whether it's with Harvey Weinstein or Cosby or whatever, which one of the central ideas of Me Too is that all women must be believed. All victims, in inverted commas, must be believed. That's how it starts.
Yeah.
But we know in this country that so-called victims turn out not to have been victims. Carl Beach would be the finest example of that. Yep. In America, there was the Duke Lacrosse, where a lady had accused a number of students of raping her. She was black, they were white. Turned out to be a complete fantasy. So these kinds of things go on, and jury verdicts have been overturned time and time again. Yeah. And obviously we hope that this is going to happen on this occasion as well. Then finally, the performance of the court, the judge in particular, in terms of the views that she took on pre-trial on various motions, the non-prosecution agreement, very controversial. Controversially, she rejected it. That was the basis on which Bill Cosby was released, because the state had not stood up on its side of the bargain of non-prosecution of Cosby. And yet, in Ghislaine's case, it's just thrown out. And then in trial, numerous directions given to the jury that were inappropriate and wrong, just as a matter of law. So all of these are going to form part of a powerful package of appeal points. I mean, obviously not the media, it's to do with the law, but there are some powerful legal points, but I've just given you a few others that for me showed that this trial was really not fair. And on top of that comes the revelation of the lying juror, and there may well have been others. The New York Times, we know, had reported itself that it had a juror, but then refused to say whether it was who it was or what they'd done. Court had another juror write to it and then wouldn't say what's going on there. So we don't know. You could have, you might have 25% of the jury that shouldn't have been on the jury. Yeah. Anyway, that's it.
And how has this made you view? How do you now perceive the American justice system overall? Is it complete? It seems very different to ours. Let's be honest.
Look, I'm not an expert on the American system. I can only say that it seems to me that it's enormously tilted in favor of the prosecution, from the grand jury process to the fact that consistently free speech rights guaranteed under the First Amendment are not, somehow trump the individual rights of pretrial detainees or defendants. Even small things. For example, in our case, in the British system, the defense has the last word. In the American system, the prosecution has the last word. So in other words, the defense makes a powerful appeal and gives the time for the prosecution to make its points and come back again
Yeah.
And just physically, the prosecution is closer physically to the jury than the defense is in the American courts. And in British court, the defense is closer to lots of little points here and there. You know, there was no possibility in an English system that the prosecutor would have been able to hold a press conference, basically say that this woman is guilty before any evidence had been presented and any trial had taken place.
Yeah.
So whether it's the way that we patrol the media, and so that once a case is on trial or it's held within the legal system, that's it. You can't interfere with it. You can't report it. You can't. I mean, you can bear fact someone's on trial or whatever, but you can't have the kind of thing that's gone on with endless programs.
Yeah.
You know, where Ghislaine is depicted as some evil mole. You know, it's just grotesque. So, to my mind, this system needs to be have a bit of fairness injected into it. I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen, but I'm damn certain it hasn't happened in my sister's case.
No, I agree. Well, you know, we've spoken a lot about the need for jury impartiality, and you've just touched upon media, the media and their influence and impartiality or lack thereof. How do you think the British and indeed international press have covered the accusations made against your sister, and what influence do you think they've had with regards to public opinion? You've mentioned, you know, and I've seen it myself, it's, you know, she's completely demonized. What impact do you think that had overall, and what needs to be done?
Well, it's from the start, the process has been where, I mean, first of all, it's a case that has got everything that newspapers, especially popular newspapers or red tops over in Britain, love. You know, it's got sex, it's got death, these guys dying in prison. It's got royalty, it's got money, it's got famous people, it's got young girls, it's just got everything that you could dream of. If you had to write up what elements would drive a story, they're all there. Almost all of them are there. So, and it's international. And because we live in 24/7 time and this thing is going on full pelt, it's just catnip.
Yeah.
So it's a story that it gives and gives and keeps giving. And of course, Ghislaine has quite a well-known name, was well-known before she came on the scene. And in this country, my father was a large figure, not perhaps as internationally so, but certainly in Britain, and also a press owner. And so this is just very, very exciting. And then, so it starts with that. The elements are all there. And then you get a situation where on the back of Me Too, on the back of this kind of situation where victims are to be believed, women are to be believed, what it means is that you're never really going to get a proper shakedown of the other side of the story. It's not going to be presented in a way which is fair. And so the narrative the narrative has not been for Ghislaine, or if it has been about her, it's been negatively portrayed. So if you look at the film or you look at the articles and whatever, that's the position. And the accusers have just come out in spades to drive this, been paid substantial amounts of money by Netflix and other such organizations to they're not going to stand there and say, oh, our heart bleeds for Ghislaine. They're going to tell their story. And because Ghislaine is incarcerated and has been for 2 years, she's not been able to tell her story properly.
Yeah. And what we're noticing as well is it's not just that the accusers are allowed to say absolutely anything they want without it being fact checked. You know, I've actually approached numerous newspapers and pointed out certain aspects from some of the accusers that have been proven to be false, yet are still being printed. That's what's one of the biggest concerns in all this. Then they seem to be focusing on fiction. But you know, you've just touched upon it yourself about the documentaries and things that have been put out. Last time I interviewed you, we had a nice chat about your family and about your father. Obviously, your father was a very influential figure. He had lots of positives about him as well. Obviously, instilled that in yourself. But what I've noticed in the documentaries, we're seeing them flooded. They're mainly focused on sensationalism, unsubstantiated claims, etc. The most recent one was the BBC's The House of Maxwell. What did you think about that documentary, and why do they keep focusing on your father, despite him having absolutely nothing to do with Ghislaine's trial or anything?
Let's just, the House of Maxwell is, I think, the executive director of that's a man called Colin Barr. Now, he has form, as far as my father's concerned. He put out a film, a drama starring David Suchet, I think 12, 13 years ago. So that's not the first time he has visited this subject. I personally, I thought the earlier effort in 2007 was, in some parts, laughable. So badly wrong was it factually, and the way they set out to depict things. I think this is looks to me like it's there's been more effort has gone into it, but as far as my father's concerned, there has been a thread in the whole business in this whole case, where they wanted to, the press and media have wanted to come up with a rather simplistic view that because my father was considered a bad man, that the rotten apple never falls far from the tree, and therefore they try and make this link between my father and Ghislaine to such an extent that he's given relatively short shrift, and she is given a much bigger role than the reality in terms of their relationship. And I don't particularly happen to believe that she was my father's favorite, but everybody insists that that was the case, even though they don't know. My father's been dead 30 years, and they don't know my sister. They infer that because he called the boat the Lady Ghislaine, it must mean that she was his favorite. I mean, I was there the day the boat was christened. Physically. It was in a shipyard in Holland somewhere, Amsterdam. And it was delightful. It turned out to be the Lady Ghislaine. And my father said to my sister, before you get any ideas, I wanted to call this boat the Lady Elizabeth for your mother, but that name was already taken, and you can't have two boats with the same name. So that was the end of that. Anyway, so that's the truth about that particular nonsense. And it's just a sort of shorthand to say he was bad, she's bad. Somehow the brothers got off in the middle of it. No, otherwise we would have all been bad. Yeah. So it's lazy, it's inaccurate. And as far as the other so-called revelations of the House of Maxwell, another one of them is that my father allegedly met Epstein before he died, and that's how the connection with Ghislaine is established. And there's some idea that somehow the pension funds were siphoned off and Epstein then laundered them. I mean, it's just ludicrous. Yeah. Anyway, it makes for very good television, I'm sure, and no doubt the BBC will sell it very successfully. But you notice that not one member of my family took part in this film. And in fact, there were very few people that I regard as having some input who could have said something interesting and unalloyed. I thought one or two of the people that did speak, I thought were truthful and did a good job, but they weren't particularly speaking about Ghislaine. But I don't think this is one of the BBC have not covered themselves with glory here. No. As for other films and so on. I mean, you know, the Netflix in particular stand in my book very low in my esteem, because they just presented a completely one-shot, one-dimensional, one point of view, and it's just wrong.
Yeah, and when they add in dramatic, eerie, or sinister music, it suddenly has an impact.
That's par for the course.
Yeah, exactly.
So the ridiculous dummy of someone falling into the water about 100 times in this film.
Yeah. Well, we even saw one of the ITV and even Piers Morgan interviewed a very close friend of Ghislaine, who, you know, gave these long accounts. She wasn't questioned, wasn't fact checked. We later found out she had no relationship with Ghislaine whatsoever. When I contacted her to ask why she lied, she said, no, blah, blah, blah. I did know Ghislaine. In the end, I said, look, I can prove we know it's already come out. You did not speak to Ghislaine. You did not know her. Then she said, I wasn't in it for the money. Anyway, her next statement to me was, okay, I admit I had no relationship with Ghislaine. I'll happily do the interview. How much are you going to pay me? So, but,
yes, yeah.
Listen, one of the most outspoken accusers, and perhaps the person who led to Ghislaine ending up on trial in the first place, is Virginia Giuffre. I've written a lot about her, yet she wasn't chosen by the prosecution to give testimony in your sister's trial. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I think my own view of that is because I think they realized she would have had a very difficult time under cross-examination, and that she could have done more damage than have helped the prosecution's cause. It stands to reason, Jay, that if you have a powerful witness whom you believe is telling the truth, and whose combination of the truth and the way they can tell that truth sincerely, hand on heart, look the jury in the eye and say, this happened to me and I did this or I did that, you're going to use that person because it's going to be very effective. Yeah. The fact that they did not use her tells both of us all we already know. Yeah. They could not stand her up under cross-examination because of the tremendous multiple inconsistencies in her prior accounts on almost every subject for years. That is why I believe they did not run with this particular witness.
Yeah, and since we last spoke as well, and since Ghislaine's trial, Virginia's legal team launched a civil, not criminal, lawsuit against Prince Andrew. I think they actually launched it just before your sister's trial, didn't they? Which gave them maximum exposure and perhaps a bit more influence on the trial itself or the coverage of it of Ghislaine. So they launched it against Prince Andrew in the run-up. The judge denied Andrew the right to use vital evidence to defend himself, including Virginia's memoir, in which she made numerous false accusations against high-profile politicians, celebrities, etc. Everyone from Paris Hilton's dad, a second prince, and foreign presidents. In it, she also wrote a long, detailed account based on her claim that she'd had sex with Prince Andrew in New Mexico. Then under oath during her deposition in 2016, she admitted she'd never met any foreign presidents, whom she then went on to accuse falsely, accepted she'd never slept with Paris Hilton's dad, and that she'd never been with Prince Andrew in New Mexico. Basically, she lied. The press refuses to report about those lies. I think I'm the only one that's covered it so far. And many others, many other lies that she's demonstrably made against innocent people. Yet Prince Andrew still settled the lawsuit out of court for a large sum of money. What are your thoughts on how the Prince Andrew Virginia lawsuit was handled and on his decision to settle?
Look, I suppose we're never really going to know, are we? Because he's Prince Andrew and it's all been swept away. However, this is the Jubilee year of his mother. Yeah. He is a dutiful son. This really causes her enormous, it's obvious, it's any mother, it must cause her immense pain. He's just exceptionally embarrassed. He doesn't want to do anything to upset the year. And I think that he had to fold his tent, really, and do the best he could by the crown. Do I think that he wished it had gone the other way and he'd given evidence? I don't know. I think he would have not been. I think it would have been a very difficult evidence for him to give. We know that he's, we have the example of his performance at Emily Maitlis's interview in 2019. So he's not good in that kind of one-on-one situation, and in a court where he's fighting for his life. I think it would have been very difficult. However, I also think that it would have been just as difficult for Giuffre as it would have been for him. I mean, they couldn't, he said, produce the original of the infamous photograph in London, where allegedly the events that she says happened, and she couldn't produce it. She's never been able to produce that particular photo. So at one level, I suppose it suited both parties that ultimately it went the way it went. But I think that he may well have wished to take his chance, and he may have got home on it, but he had to fold his tent, and that was that.
I think as well, what may have, obviously, like you say, we can't know for certain, but what may have influenced his decision is the fact that Virginia's team would go into the press, saying we could depose Meghan Markle, which was ridiculous. We could depose his children. So it's the royal family. It's very telling that out of, I think I've counted about 18 people whom Virginia has accused, this is the only person that she's taken to court for money. The royal family are very renowned for not going to court. There's a high probability of them dropping.
Yeah, no, listen, I agree. I think he's relatively, certainly very high profile target, and so on. But I mean, we're just not going to know how this how it came the way it came. I think it's very interesting that he ended up paying what seems like a large amount of money to her non-profit, which is it's unusual. I think that happened the way that it did. Maybe she didn't want to have too much money coming to her personally, because of course it makes her rather wealthy and therefore attackable by other parties. But we'll never know.
That's a good point. In a shocking twist, I say shocking because it hadn't been reported by the mainstream media before. So during Ghislaine's trial, one of the prosecution witnesses, Carolyn Andriano, accused Virginia Giuffre of not being a victim, but a recruiter who essentially groomed Carolyn from the age of 14 to sell her to Epstein. Other former friends and an ex-boyfriend of Virginia have also made similar claims and have supported that narrative that she was actually recruiting and enjoying the lifestyle and was grooming younger children to sell. What are your own views on that? It's proven that Virginia's lied on numerous things and made false accusations, but is she hiding something else? And should she be investigated? And has, in your opinion, has she basically done what she's accusing Ghislaine Maxwell of doing?
I mean, I don't know. I think the key to this is going to be the fact that she is facing a court case from one of the men that she has alleged that she was abused by, namely Professor Alan Dershowitz, the American lawyer. Now, he's not letting go. He's not settling up. His reputation has been trashed, and he's determined to have her deposed and put her in the court. So it's quite obvious that if that happens, and I think it will logically happen, and she is unable to deal with the questions that are posed by Mr. Dershowitz, and it turns out that he wins his case, then I think she is in trouble. And I think that at that point, those inquiries of her could, maybe they should, be undertaken. So I think the jury's out on this lady, and let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think Dershowitz's trial is going to be crucial. Dershowitz himself alleges that she's been dodging being deposed. She's going to eventually have to be deposed if she, there's no way of like with Prince Andrew of getting out of it. Let's say that she is found to have defamed him, found to have lied and made that up completely. I've said already, it's already proven that she's lied and made false accusations against other people. But if it's proven in a court of law, do you think that could have any impact on Ghislaine's trial, on her appeal?
Well, I think it will. It will have to be reported, and people will have to reconsider their positions. And of course, she wasn't a witness at my sister's trial. But then, if what you say actually comes to happen, it'll show why she was never called as a witness. Whether that then can be used in any appeal process, I don't know. I don't know enough about the law. However, there was also the matter of perjury that my sister was accused with at the civil action against Giuffre, which is still hanging, and which may potentially be dismissed. And as a result of any findings against Miss Giuffre could well then be dismissed for good. I mean, we don't know. It's too far out, but I would expect that all these matters ultimately will come out in the open sometime in the remainder of this year and the early part of 23.
Yeah. I think a lot of it would have already been out there if the press had done their job and reported facts from both sides of the argument. But another thing I wanted to touch upon is, as we know, social media dominates the narrative. It's a massive thing. And people can often act with the mob-like mentality. I've seen your account, the real Ghislaine account, that was run by your family, so siblings of Ghislaine. It's been attacked constantly. I get attacked, nothing that, in comparison to yourself and that. But what sort of abuse have you and your family received?
Well, the thing about social media, I don't need to tell you, is that those people that choose to write foul things and horrible ideas and they want to kill you are anonymous.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to say anything you like, as long as your name's not going to come out. And so there's been quite a bit of that kind of abuse. Now family might put a statement out, or I might make an interview like this, and then that interview is taken out. And then if you look, all the social media comment on it, it's makes tough reading, without a doubt. That comes with the territory. And so I just roll with it. I'm assuming, I don't think my brothers and sisters individually have been called out. I happen to be, as you know, the member of the family that has had media duties to carry out in connection with Ghislaine. So I have been more called out by these trolls than anyone else. But otherwise, that's it. I've had no physical threats and so on. I consider myself quite fortunate. Ghislaine, of course, has been the subject of immense amount of terrible social media comments, some of which has been shared with the police and so on, because it's just that bad. Yeah.
And can you give us an update on Ghislaine's current situation? I know obviously she's still incarcerated. How is she feeling? Have you had any communication with her? And are you worried about her mental and physical health?
I think we all have to be worried about that, because she's now been banged up 2 years coming, and she's had this terrible roller coaster of arrest. She lost 5 bail applications, consistently turned down for reasoning which is really just wrong, just because the court was not going to find itself on the wrong side of public opinion. And so she's really had a dose of it. The way in which the treatment has been dished out in jail has been really shocking. Notwithstanding all of that, I know through her lawyers, who are daily contact with her and have daily video calls with her, that she remains resolute. She is determined to see this through. She believes in her innocence completely of the charges that she faces here, notwithstanding the verdict. And she's getting on with preparing her appeal. Obviously, the next thing that's coming is the sentencing on the 28th of June. It's about 50 days out from here. And obviously, we're not holding our breath that there's not going to be some incredibly savage sentence. I suspect, nor is she. But we are absolutely determined that justice will prevail for Ghislaine, and that however unpopular it is, and however much the counter narrative to the prevailing narrative may be to people's ears who don't want to hear it, this is about the justice system doing what it should do, and that's the basis of why we have appeal courts, and we may have to go to the Supreme Court. There are big issues involved here. I mean, I can just close by saying that the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers in America, the NACDL, is a really serious body comprising 40 or 50,000 lawyers for the defense in the United States, highly unusually weighed in to this case right at the death of it, just before the inquiry into Juror 50, which we discussed earlier, to say that to ask permission from the court to be involved and to be able to put a statement down. And that statement said broadly this, that it's very unusual for the NACDL to get involved at the district justice level. Normally, it only deals with appeal or Supreme Court, where issues of real importance are being decided upon. But because this issue, chosen by this judge to decide whether or not a juror had been impartial or not, was so fundamental to the justice system, they chose to get involved at the district level. And they said in their brief that given what had happened, in the words of the juror, no one's interpreting what he said himself that he did and said during the deliberations, meant that the trial had been structurally lost. That's a powerful statement to make. So, regardless of what this court has decided, on the basis of which it has decided, we are confident that on that central point of the appeal, not to mention the many others that comprise the full appeal, that Ghislaine will be successful. And she will be, whether we end up with a retrial or indeed that she's cleared, and cleared in the sense that the non-prosecution agreement that she was benefited from was wrongly interpreted, and that's the end of that. So there are numerous. And I finish like this just to say that Ghislaine has hope, and she knows she has a strong and supportive family. She has many friends, despite how it seems, all the so-called former friends of Ghislaine who are busy helping the BBC make their programs on Netflix are not. I don't regard, and I don't think Ghislaine ever regards them as former friends. In some cases, they're not even, certainly not friends as you and I would regard them. But she has real friends who can't come out and shout from the rooftops because of the cancel culture that we live in, and they're worried about their livelihoods and their children and all the rest of them. But we know who they are, and they know who they are. So, and Ghislaine knows who they are. So, we have hope. We're going to fight, and that's where it is. So let's pick this up in a few months' time, maybe post-trial, post-sentencing, or maybe when the next time there's a development with the Dershowitz or whatever you like.
Yeah, no, listen, Ian, I really appreciate you speaking to me again today. I know I've taken up a lot of your time with my rambling questions as usual. But listen, I really appreciate it. And like you said, we'll keep in touch and have a catch up after this.
You're welcome.
So all the best.
You're welcome.